want to welcome everyone to our workshop, our work session on March 24th, 2026. We have one of the most interesting topics and probably most important topics that we will discuss. And Mr. Manager, we appreciate you presenting it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to express my appreciation to council, certainly for dedicating so much time to this very important topic. But before we begin, I just want to say a thank you to Jonathan and his entire team in the budget department. So for those council members that have been with us for some time or have participated or watched the process over the years, we get better at this every year. And council challenges us every year to improve transparency, to improve our outreach and accountability. And every year I think we get better at that. So I hope you'll see that continued trend of improvement. But just want to thank the entire team because this really is a year-long effort. It's not just sort of what we see in the March to May timeframe, but they really start working at this almost as when we put the finishing touches on the budget in May. They're at work for next year. So thanks everybody for their time and attention to this. So what we're going to do today is go through the framework of how we make decisions and starting with our vision, what we're trying to achieve, and our guiding principles, including council's budget guiding principles, sort of the guardrails that we look at as staff before we begin putting pen to paper on the budget. We're going to give you an update on how we're making progress on City Council's strategic priorities. We touched on this a little bit at your last retreat, but we're making some significant progress in some areas. We still have some work to do in other areas, so we'll discuss those. We'll go through the budget process and how we really make these decisions. We call it aligning our resource decisions to our strategy so that people can see that we're very purposeful about what we're trying to achieve. We're going to talk about how we allocate resources to achieve your desired outcome. So making Chesapeake an exceptional place to live, learn, work, farm, and play, and all the things that we want to achieve to make that happen, how we determine which resources will be available for each of those outcomes. I'm going to turn it over then to Jonathan, who's going to go through the numbers and all the charts and graphs so people can really have an illustration of how their money's being used. We'll talk about the resources, of course, and how they're allocated throughout the budget. I do want to close with some issues on the horizon, and the big one for me this year is impacts of state legislation. This was a General Assembly session like none that I've seen in my career. And it wasn't just budget stuff, but a lot of things will have budget impacts. And so for those that are going to have budget impacts now and in the future, I want to spend some time talking to the council a little bit about that and get any direction from council on how to proceed there. And then, of course, we'll go through the next steps and closing thoughts, particularly on how people can continue to engage in the budget process. I won't read this vision. We talk about this a lot, but I mentioned it earlier. Our goal, we have 4,000 team members here in the city, and we're laser focused every day on trying to make Chesapeake an exceptional place to live, learn, work, farm, and play. We use the vision to guide all of the choices that we make, including those that you're going to see today. How we make decisions, we ask each of our team members to use three basic principles. If you're making a choice, and we use this choice in making our budget decisions, will our choice help make Chesapeake an exceptional place? Will it provide outstanding service to council, our community, our customers, and each other? And will it be fiscally responsible and sustainable? So it's based on our vision, it's based on our values, and it's based on council's budget guiding principles. Our desired outcomes, these come right from your vision for the community and also from practices of good governance. We want to have accountability, economic prosperity, connectivity, cultural diversity, environmental responsibility, and safety and security. And so you'll see resources allocated to achieve and advance all of these outcome areas. This is a graphic that we use throughout the organization to really keep all of our decision-making framework in one place. So on the outer band, you can see the outcomes I mentioned that we're trying to achieve. On the middle circle are the anchors we use to make our decisions. And then in the middle, this is our basic mission as a city, providing infrastructure and services to benefit the community and helping council and the community make choices, address needs, and pursue opportunities. That's what we're all about. So what are those budget guiding principles that I mentioned? Number one, this is when I, by the Code of Virginia, I'm charged with proposing a budget, and I'm free to propose whatever budget that I believe meets the needs of the community. On top of that charter for the city and the general provisions in the Code of Virginia, council has given us budget guiding principles. And those principles are that we do not increase the real estate tax rate. So when I'm presenting a budget to you, it's based on the previous year's real estate tax rate. We do not add new fees. So this budget contains no new fees. We do not supplant losses in state or federal funds with local funds. So when the state has a mandate and they're providing services and resources and we're providing those services, if the state eliminates those resources, we don't automatically backfill. We make a purposeful choice whether or not to backfill and how, if it's a mandate, we still have to provide the service, but what level of service are we going to provide? If it's not a mandate, we have a choice whether or not to continue that service. You see one item here, the police department has requested city funding to maintain some software programs that they've received that were previously funded through a state grant. So you might be asking yourself why, if we don't supplant losses, why is this showing up in the budget? It's because principle 4 is we only deviate from those first 3 principles when it's addressing one of council's strategic priorities. Since safety and security has historically been your alpha priority, we feel like it's important to continue these programs. They've demonstrated real results for the police department, so we are recommending continuing these programs even though they're no longer funded by a state grant. So our philosophy for allocating resources, as you probably know, each year the departments work on what are the needs for their particular agencies. And as you can imagine, there's significantly more requests from a budget, from city's budgeted resources than we could possibly accommodate. And so we have to have some kind of framework to analyze all of those requests. And we use a practice called outcome-based budgeting. We're trying to achieve the things that council wants to achieve on behalf of the community. So for an agency request to make the city manager's proposed budget, those requests must align with one or more of council's desired outcomes. The programs and services have to be financially sustainable. A lot of jurisdictions get in trouble because they'll start a program that we call flavor of the month. Everybody's doing it, so we got to start doing this. When the government starts a new program or service, it often continues forever because many places aren't looking at that program or service to see if it still has a constituency, if it's still meeting its needs. That is not what we do. We're very purposeful about the services we choose to provide, and then we evaluate those services to make sure that they're still viable and sustainable over time. If you have a budget request, the relevance to council's strategic priorities will be given greater consideration than any other request. So council is elected by the community, staff is not elected, and so we give great deference to projects that are advancing council's desired outcomes. And then projects must align with and advance the implementation of a comprehensive plan. As a former planner, it's always shocking to me how many local governments do not consider their comprehensive plan when they make their budgets, including their capital improvement program. They use their comprehensive plan really to review rezonings or special use permits, but it's equally, if not more important, that we use that plan. If we say this is how we want the city to develop in the future, that we're using the power of our infrastructure and our resources to make that future a reality. So some assumptions when we prepare the proposed budget. We want to maintain existing levels of service and maintain the high quality of life that we enjoy here in the city of Chesapeake. And of course, we want to maintain the lowest tax and fee burden within the region. And so when we're setting out the budget each year, these are the highest basic assumptions that we utilize. So that regional rate comparison, we show you this chart every year. As you can see, we are the second lowest in our stormwater taxes. We're tied for the lowest in meals taxes, tied for the lowest in automobile license tax, lowest in cigarette tax. We're dramatically the lowest in solid waste tax because we have zero. Solid waste that's paid for by real estate and personal property taxes here in Chesapeake. And so we have the second lowest real estate tax rate and second lowest personal property tax rate. And the question I get asked all the time, if we had a solid waste fee that would be what it would take to run the solid waste division, could we have the lowest real estate tax and or personal property tax rate in the region? And the answer is likely yes. If it's not the lowest, it would be right there tied with the others. And so that's a pretty significant budget driver on the city, not having a solid waste fee. So I mentioned earlier, our goal is to have the lowest tax and fee burden within the region. So our proposed budget maintains that. Now, please note that for Chesapeake, these numbers include our proposed budget. For the other cities, as with this presentation every year, this is based on their previous budget, but we will update this as each city proposes their future budgets, just so we know where we exist in the landscape here within the region. So how do we make progress on council strategic priorities? This chart you have is something that you saw at your retreat in January. It's a list of fully programmed or partially funded projects that council has determined to be strategic priorities. What you see there in the middle, the projects are on the left. The second column are which of council's desired outcomes does this achieve. Some of them achieve multiple outcomes, but we put the primary outcome there. In the third column, we have what is funded or programmed through January 30th of 2026. And then on the far right, you'll see check boxes where additional resources are needed to complete the mission. So for example, we have the Cuffy Pool. It's a fully funded capital project, but this is the year that we'll begin hiring the staff to operate that pool. Next is partially funded or unfunded projects or priorities. Same format, project on the left, and then going through outcomes, funding, and additional funding needs. If you recall, 5 or 6 years ago, in that first category, road maintenance, we had identified a $20 million a year annual funding need, and at that time we had $0 per year funded or programmed for that. So we were digging ourselves a further hole every year by $20 million. We made very significant steps over the course of the past several years to try to get up to what it would need to be fully funding that program on an annual basis. If you think about the impacts of underfunding that program, most of the city's roads, or many of the city's roads, were built in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s when we had significant growth and development in the city. Those roads have a life expectancy of 15, 20, 25 years. So all of those roads are beyond their planned life expectancy, and we've never fully capitalized a fund to address those needs. But we're making very significant progress on that. So that's an example of partially programmed or funded. And then last are council identified priorities that we've talked about over the past few years that are minimally programmed or unfunded. The item at the top that you'll see is fire and police facility replacement. We went decades in this city during those major periods of growth where we didn't invest in new fire stations and police stations. And so during the last 5 years, we've made significant progress on those stations, but we have significant progress to go. So while we have significant resources for facility replacement, there's still many services and facilities that remain unaddressed. Another one are projects that are just, another example are projects that we've identified as priorities, but they are so expensive that they're way beyond the city's capacity to fund. An example of that is the Centerville Turnpike Bridge replacement. So we estimate that project to be in excess of $300 million. That would be over $30 million of annual debt service capacity we would need to fund that project, and we just do not have the capacity to take on a project of that magnitude. So the budget process itself, every year we ask the departments to go through an exercise that we call stop, start, continue. So we don't just assume that departments are going to get the same budget that they got last year. In fact, we give them a target of a few percentage points less than what they got last year. And we said, if you needed to meet that target, what would be the programs or services that you would cut from your budget? The reason we do that is so that each agency is taking a look at their services every year, as I mentioned earlier, to make sure that the services we're providing are still meeting the needs of council, meeting the needs of community. They still have a constituency. They're still meeting their performance metrics. And so departments will propose cuts based on the programs or services that are least impactful to advancing council's priorities. And only when they make those proposed cuts do we then consider what program should we start doing. So if are there things we could be doing today that are more important than things we're already doing, right? And then lastly, the vast majority of our services we are continuing. So they're the basic operations of the city, police, fire, mental health, human services, operating our libraries, our park system. We're continuing the vast majority of our services. So what are some examples of things we stopped? One pretty significant example is it's a capital project relatively nearby. It is an elevation project for Battlefield Boulevard. So you're all familiar with Battlefield Boulevard just north of the Great Bridge where we occasionally have flooding issues. That elevation project is very expensive, but it isn't a project we could afford. We could do that project. However, shutting that road down would be so impactful to the community for the number of years it would take for that road to be shut down, that it's not a project that we have the capacity to take on from a traffic operations perspective. Now, in the future, if you think of the Great Bridge Village plan, we will be adding lane capacity to Battlefield Boulevard. So as we add new lanes, that's when we will when we can move traffic to new lanes, we will shut down the existing lanes and do the elevation project. And we'll build the new lanes at an appropriate elevation so we won't have flooding. So that's really an example of eliminating a budget because it won't serve the community to do that project right now. It'll be just too impactful on the community. Another one is an elimination of the cadet program in the sheriff's office. So there was some legislative changes about the age in which the sheriff can recruit new employees into the organization, so that cadet program is no longer necessary. And then elimination of long-term position vacancies. So we take a look through each organization at positions that have been unfilled for a long time, and to figure out, are those positions still the most important? What's the reason that they're long-term vacancy, and can we program those positions somewhere else or eliminate them altogether? So what did we continue doing? These are some examples of things that either have cost increases just to maintain existing services, or is a purposeful choice that we're making to maintain existing services. So an example is a proposed reduction of hours of service for our libraries. So we have more library hours per week than several of our other cities here in the region, especially on Sundays. And so when the libraries did their budget proposal, having to take a target reduction, one of the things that they proposed, they don't recommend it, but one of the things they proposed was reducing hours of operation at the libraries. So we made a choice to not do that. We're adding those hours back into the budget. So that's an example of something that was proposed for elimination, but we're electing to continue to provide those services, because even though other cities aren't providing that service, those hours are heavily utilized by residents here in Chesapeake. In fact, they're some of the more utilized hours for some of our facilities. In addition, just maintaining our existing level of replacements for a fire apparatus and medic unit has an increase of over $16 million in the CIP. So this is not improving service. This is just maintaining our stock on its existing replacement schedule. And similarly, additional funds to maintain current lane miles of road resurfacing. This is just cost increases associated to inflation inflation. If we don't add additional funds to this, we will actually be resurfacing less lane miles of roadway throughout the city. And resurfacing roadways in the city is one of the top things we hear from the community that they'd like us to make sure we maintain. So then what are new programs? What are things that we're recommending that we start doing? The top one is improving firefighter safety during incidents. So fire department requested 3 positions, a fire safety officer, for a dedicated fire safety officer for each shift. And so we're recommending we test pilot this. The fire department recommended that we start with the A shift, and so we're recommending funding for a vehicle, supplies, and personnel, in addition to the complement, to be able to staff up the fire safety officer. This is something that in the future I would like to, we assume that this is going to be successful. And if it's successful and adds value, we'd like to go ahead and add that to all 3 shifts. I mentioned this earlier, we're preparing for the opening of the Cuffey Pool. And then we're providing additional safe and structured recreational opportunities. So you all have received correspondence from constituents over the past few years about the need for recreational facilities or maybe a rec center in the Crestwood area. Councilmember Ritter's asked us several times about working with schools as the new facility opens, and so we do have an agreement with schools to be able to use that and some other facilities. And what we'd like to do is start a drop-in summer program where we're basically, between Parks and Rec and schools, we're creating a low-cost, high-impact rec center in those communities by utilizing school facilities relatively inexpensively. And then what didn't get funded? I mentioned there's way more requests than we could certainly fund. That's both in the operating budget and in the capital budget. So while we're making significant progress on fire stations, we don't have funding for Fire Station 1, which is the South Norfolk replacement. There's still a little bit of site selection work that needs to be done on that project anyway, so not having funding is not really delaying that project, but it's something I just want to keep putting on council's radar screen because it is an important project for the future. Likewise, Greenbrier Library replacement project, it's likely that we'll be doing the combined Greenbrier Police and Fire Station on that site, which likely means we'll need to relocate the library. Putting all those facilities on that site, even in a reconfigured manner, is probably suboptimal. So we're actively looking for a Greenbrier Library replacement site right now. We have some radio replacement equipment here in the complex and some network center renovation projects that we're doing, but we've chosen to delay those projects a little bit. We've had on the plans, and you saw this in your Parks, Recreation, and Tourism master plan that council recently approved, some significant additions to the community center complement that we would like. You're going to see some that we've advanced in this budget, but one, the Centerville Park multipurpose community center design project, we don't have the resources to advance that this year. And then a historic preservation plan. So we haven't had an updated plan since the 90s. We have some significant new assets here in the city. So we're advancing work on historic preservation, but to do an update to that plan is probably going to have to wait until next year at the earliest. And then what didn't get funded in the operating budget, and I should have said, so there were almost $166 million of unfunded CIP requests and a little over $2 million in unfunded operating budget requests. I mentioned earlier the 2 fire safety officers. We also had an additional position requested in our Human Services CARES Resource Center. I think I briefed council on this. We talked about it a little bit at the retreat. We do intend to expand the shelter operations to year-round basis. We're relying heavily on the volunteers and CAST and Abolist right now, and it's a fantastic partnership, and it's really a benefit to the city, and really I think a great tribute to the city that we have such a strong partnership with the faith-based community. But we have some additional programming. We're still getting our feet wet there, but in the future we have some additional programming that we would like to do at that facility. Police requested 2 customer service clerk positions to improve responsiveness to requests. We have an operational way through some technology and some other resources that we have committed that we think we can accomplish this request at a lower cost alternative, but it's something that we'll need to continue to monitor. We had requesting from Fine Arts Commission for enhanced funding for the Chesapeake Arts Program. That's something that we weren't able to fund this year. Additional groundkeeper and trail maintenance positions for Parks, Recreation, and Tourism, very important positions. We did fund some positions in this space, but not fully funding Parks and Recreation requests. So this is just an example of some of the operating budget requests that are unfunded. So how do we allocate resources to achieve outcomes? What are the choices that we did make? So first is competitive pay. So I should say this is, if Kristen Bailey's in the room, our Chief Financial Officer. So I should say that the very first dollar we spend, of course, is paying our debt. So we want to maintain our AAA bond rating. So clearly paying our debt obligations is very high on our priority list. But when it comes to the operating budget, competitive pay is critically important. So council will remember 5 years ago, we had done an assessment of both public safety and the general workforce. We had fallen dramatically behind our peers in pay and benefits. And so even during the pandemic, when we cut tens of millions of dollars out of the budget, we invested $26 million annual ongoing into pay and benefits, and that's really paid dividends. It's significantly reduced our turnover. We continue to improve on our performance metrics, and we want to continue our competitive pay and not get behind again. So this budget proposal includes a general wage increase for the general workforce to maintain our competitiveness, step increase for sworn public safety. This has been a very successful program for us. Implemented this, I think 4 or 5 years ago, but we want to maintain. We made a commitment to our public safety team, and we want to continue to honor that commitment. We made some promises decades ago that we didn't honor, and those issues are still felt in the organization. We made a real progress with our public safety team by implementing this, and so we want to maintain fidelity to it. And likewise, the capacity for a market adjustment. So as you recall, in addition to the STEP plan, we also take a look at the market every year, and this is actually with the general workforce and with the public safety, but to make sure we stay competitive, so we have capacity to do that. We're actually able to keep our employee contributions to our health insurance flat this year. And that's greatly appreciated by the employees. There was a lot of headlines. You see this, in the headlines when other jurisdictions or school districts or others, they've had double-digit increase in health insurance premiums that they've had to pass on to their employees. We've had very low increases over the past few years, and we were able to keep it flat this year. And to be honest, this is a testament to our employees of being good consumers of our wellness program. So our profile has really improved over the years, and the employees are benefiting from those programs and services greatly. And then lastly, our recognition programs. When our employees do great things, we believe they should be rewarded and recognized, so we continue to maintain those programs. We do look at the market in our different business lines, not just with pay and traditional benefits, but some non-traditional benefits. And we found that we were out of market with some of our stipends in our sworn public safety. So we've increased those stipends, and we're increasing the tool stipend for our mechanics. And then career progression. We've done a great job of getting the workforce that we want here, and making sure we stay competitive. And we want to stay, really stay in the top tier. So we're accelerating the pathway for senior and master sworn public safety positions, so that folks can qualify for those positions more quickly. And then we're broadening the career progression plans we have for the general workforce, so that in areas where it makes sense, you might not have to wait for a vacancy to come open before someone can get promoted. If it's someone that's a great employee, they've been with us, they're doing great things, they qualify for promotion, we have the ability to promote them without waiting for a vacancy. So those are pretty significant investments in our team. Accountability, this is our newest desired outcome. We really want to work on this space, and so we talked about this at the retreat. We stood up a resourcefulness program. That's one of our core values. It's one of the ways we're able to maintain high citizen satisfaction, low taxes and fees, is by having a very resourceful team. And so this is Chesapeake Achieves is our resourcefulness program. We want to expand the number of people that we can take through that program to give those tools to all of our employees. We want to be accountable to our customers, so we have some additional resources deployed to records management, process improvement, customer service. So if you think about us as a large business, each of our departments is responsible for customer service. We want to add a position that's responsible for ensuring outstanding customer service citywide. So someone that is watching social media, listening to council meetings, looking at our customer service reports to find out what customers are saying, and then working with the departments to make sure that we're quickly resolving issues and improving customer service. Likewise, in our budget and human resource department, with a growing organization and a commitment to greater transparency and accountability, we have some additional resources needs. And then using technology to make sure that we improve our efficiency and improve customer service. We have a variety of technology initiatives that we can use both to slow the growth of the government and achieve our accountability and customer service goals. Connectivity, we want to continue to improve some of our parks, including our trails and recreation opportunities, expand our waterfront access to have more gathering spaces, our trails opportunities along key corridors. In cultural diversity, we want to continue our efforts at the historic village and rehab the superintendent's house. We believe we're on the cusp finally of getting that house turned over, but we have resources to advance that project, and we want to convert it into a museum. You had a presentation last week on your SWAM-V, Small Women and Minority and Veteran Businesses. We want to continue those programs. And then placemaking. You saw you adopted a comprehensive plan and some area plans this year, and we want to make sure we're putting the resources to achieving success in those areas. Economic prosperity, we talked about this again last week, but we have funds to improve a new and existing business, improve our new business opportunities, rehab vacant and deteriorated properties, and improve and accelerate our workforce development opportunities. Being environmentally responsible, we want to improve the city's tree canopy, and we have some resources there. City Council's taken the first and biggest step in returning to curbside recycling through the new program with SIPSA, and so we'll be advancing that over the coming years. And then enhancing environmental health. This is one of the areas that Councilmember Newens requested that we add to the strategic plan. We couldn't agree more, and we'd like to add a full-time veterinarian and a part-time vet tech for the animal shelter. We contract these services out right now. In addition to providing a better service with city staff, we do believe over the long term we might actually save money by adding these resources. So I think we can achieve superior service and maybe ultimately reduce costs and achieve council's desired outcomes. And then safety and security, we want to continue to strengthen the police department's capacities. That's with staff and with technology. Continue to replace and expand our facilities. I mentioned that earlier. And then protecting the city's children. Some of this is just the right thing to do based on our metrics. Some is based on state mandates, but we do have new positions to focus on making sure that children, particularly vulnerable children in the city, are adequately protected. So Jonathan's going to run through the numbers, but basically this transition is how we turn this strategy, which is what I've talked about, into action. So the things we talk about at our retreats and each city council meeting, how does this translate into action? And I'll turn it over to Jonathan Hobbs, our budget director, to go through the numbers.
All right, thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be here again this year to talk to City Council about the City Manager's proposed budget for FY27. So I'm going to start with a very global view of the operating budget and look at both the city and schools budgets combined. So the total net operating budget for the city and schools for FY27 is proposed at just over $1.7 billion. Of that amount, Roughly 47% is on the school side, with just over 52% being on the city side. You'll see on the slide that on the city side, the budget is increasing by 4.1% compared to the adopted 26 budget, and the school's budget is increasing by about 1.3%. Again, taking that global view of city and schools combined, this chart is looking at expenditures by category, and not surprisingly, payroll and benefit costs. We are heavy in terms of employees. We are a customer service organization, so our payroll and benefit costs are over 60.7%, and then general expenses make up just over 1/5 of the total budget. And then looking at revenue, I've kind of got two highlighted areas here. The first is the largest source of revenue, or the largest category of revenue, and that is general property taxes. That is real estate tax revenue as well as personal property tax revenue, and that makes up just over 31% of the total budget. And then if you come down the table, you'll see state revenue at just over $496 million. What I would note there on the state revenue is about 69% of that amount is allocated to the schools. So now we're going to look at just the city operating budget. So I said that on the city side, we're growing by about 4.1%. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what's driving that increase. And Chris certainly mentioned some of this earlier. Employee compensation is certainly part of what's driving that 4.1% increase. We have funding set aside for a general wage increase, as well as step increases for sworn public safety. Our Line of Duty Act benefit for our sworn public safety is actually increasing this year by about 36.5% compared to FY26. So that's a relatively substantial increase for that particular benefit. Chris also mentioned the accelerated senior and master career progression programs, as well as the increased educational stipends for sworn public safety. We also have an increased tool stipend for our mechanics in Central Fleet. And speaking of Central Fleet, we've certainly allocated some additional resources to Central Fleet management in the proposed budget. As you all can remember, during COVID and coming out of COVID, it was very difficult for us to acquire replacement vehicles. We were really having a hard time getting vehicles. Purchase orders were being canceled, and we just weren't able to get vehicles, and that has had a cost over the long term. Some of our vehicles have had to remain in service much longer than we would like. So that has certainly caused an increase in costs for replacement parts. So we're adding additional funding. We've had to do this for the last several years. But the other thing that we're doing is we're really enhancing our replacement pool of funding. And we have a specific dedicated amount of $1 million this year that's going specifically toward police vehicle replacement. So the police department's budget will be increasing by $1 million for that amount. Or for that purpose, excuse me. The other thing that's driving the growth are some of the reserves and expenditures that are based on city council policy or practice. So what does that look like? City council has a general fund balance policy of 12%. So 12% of any net new additional revenue first has to go into that policy reserve. We also have the practice or transfer to the schools through the revenue sharing formula, and I'm going to show you that on a slide here in just a moment. But we also make contributions to both the city and school lot box. So what are the city and school lot box used for? Those are used as a cash source of funding for the capital improvement program, but And we've certainly reduced the amount of cash that we're using out of the lot box for capital projects. But what we are using it for much greater moving forward is to service debt service associated with bonds that we are issuing for various capital projects. And then the other policy-based item are those market-based salary adjustments that Chris mentioned earlier to maintain our position in the top three. We also have some capital projects that will be coming online in fiscal year 27 or fiscal year 28. Chris mentioned the staffing for the Cuffy Pool. We're going to bring those positions in halfway through the fiscal year to allow them to start planning for the opening of that facility and programming for the opening of that facility, as well as doing some training. We also have licensing and maintenance costs for several new IT capital projects. So as those projects come online, there's licensing and maintenance costs that get added into the operating budget. So we have a number of those that are coming online in fiscal year 2027. So I mentioned our contribution to the schools. What this slide is showing you is the past several years and the growth in the revenue, the budgeted amount for the revenue sharing formula, as well as the school lockbox. And as you can see, our budgeted contribution in the proposed budget is just over $336 million when combined the school lockbox and the revenue sharing formula. But we got some good news this year, some really frankly surprised me. So we actually have some things that are mitigating some of these increases on the city side. The first and the most substantial was a decrease in our VRS rates. So those are Virginia Retirement System rates. In my career, I'd never seen VRS rates go down. I didn't think I would ever see VRS rates go down. I've seen them go up by a very small amount, but they actually are decreasing by 2.6%. So that was like Christmas in early February in the budget office, certainly something we weren't expecting. So we were able to redeploy those savings to other priorities in the budget. Our group life insurance rates also decreased. While this is a much smaller scale in terms of savings, it certainly helps us to be able to redeploy those dollars elsewhere in the budget. Something we started talking to City Council about last year during the budget presentation was this concept of right sizing. So at that time, we told Council we would continue to look at this and see if there were budgets or programs, line items, anything that we could look at to right size. And this year we actually are focused on two particular areas. We found that for our employer contribution to health insurance, we were actually funding each employee. The contribution we were making on behalf of each employee was a little more than we needed to budget to make up the total revenue for that particular fund. So we were able to reduce that budget and again redeploy some of those savings for other priorities. And we were able to do the same thing with workers' comp. We found that in some programs, the amount that they needed was out of alignment with what we had been budgeting. Again, so we right-sized those particular line items and reallocated those savings to other priorities. So looking at expenditures by category, showed you this same graphic earlier in total for both city and schools. This is looking at just the city side. So again, not surprising, payroll and benefits is the highest proportion of expenditures on the city side at just over 45%. Again, general expenses make up about 1/5 of the expenditures on the city side of the operating budget. But I want to direct your attention to two particular categories that I'm going to talk about a little bit on a later slide, that being debt service and contribution to fund balance. So you see those two categories on the city side. They equal just over 21% of the city's budget. And again, I'm going to talk about those two categories here in just a few minutes. So Chris showed you this graphic on an earlier slide when he concluded his remarks, but this is looking at that again. And what we're showing you here is how each dollar in the general fund is expended. So if we, and this is only discretionary spending, so if we removed debt service payments and we removed any contributions that we're making to reserves and we were looking just at discretionary funding, what you can note here is that between the schools and our public safety departments, that over 70 cents of every dollar within the general fund goes for those two purposes. It's amazing how quickly I get dry sitting up here. I talk too much. So looking at the school operating budget, the school operating budget actually has 8 funds, and as I mentioned earlier, their total operating budget is increasing by 1.3%. So talk to you a little bit about why the school operating budget is increasing by 1.3% and comparing that to the city's budget that's increasing by 4.1%. So I've put a box around 4 particular funds of the total 8 funds. And the reason that we've highlighted these funds is that the superintendent's proposed budget, when compared to the FY26 adopted budget for these particular funds, those funds are actually declining. So that's certainly having a mitigating impact on any increase in their operating budget. But before we talk more specifically about some of those funds and some of those decreases in their proposed budget, what's driving the increase on the school side? And the story there is very similar to the city's budget. The superintendent is proposing a 3% compensation increase for teachers and positions on their unified pay scales. This will raise starting teacher pay to just over $57,400 annually. The superintendent is proposing to add 9 new positions to the school's budget to support academic programming and operations. And unlike the city, the schools are actually seeing an increase in their health insurance rates. So their self-insurance fund is actually increasing by about $1.3 million compared to the adopted 26 budget. So looking more specifically at some of those funds that are declining as proposed in FY27, starting with the school grant fund, this chart is showing you a comparison of federal and state grant funding from the adopted 26 budget to the proposed 27 budget. And while federal grant funding to the schools is actually increasing, there is state grant revenue is declining, so there is a net decrease in federal and state grant funding to the schools of about $3.8 million. The majority of that loss of state grant revenue is due to the expiration of the All in Virginia grant that will expire June 30, 2026. So that's really decreasing the amount of funding that they have available in their grants fund from state and federal sources. They're also reducing their use of reversion and revenue sharing true-up. Reversion is basically under expended appropriations at the end of the fiscal year. They don't spend 100% of appropriations. That wouldn't be fiscally responsible. Same way on the city side. And then also revenue sharing true up. So when we at the end of the year, when we've actually received revenue and look at the revenue sharing formula, any additional revenue that would have been calculated through the formula reverts back to the city's general fund, and it has been city council's practice to reappropriate that to the schools. So in 2026, they used about $20.7 million of that one-time funding. They used it in the athletics fund, they used it in their cell tower fund, and in their operating fund. In the superintendent's proposed budget, he is only proposing to use $8.3 million, and he's proposing to use that only in their major school operating fund. So that is a decrease of those one-time resources of $12.4 million. And we really think that the best comparator, if you want an apples-to-apples comparison of the city and school budgets, we always look at the two main operating funds. So this chart is simply showing a comparison between the city's main operating fund, the general fund, and the school's main operating fund, the school operating fund. And when you look at the percent increase in those two funds from fiscal year 26 to fiscal year 27, you can see that they're growing by about the same rate at 2.6% for the schools and 2.8% for the city. The other thing I would remind you is that the superintendent's proposed budget, which this presentation is based upon, is based on the proposed budget, state budget from Governor Youngkin back in December. So there's certainly going to be some changes to the school's budget when it is ultimately adopted by the state, and then the school board will come back and reconcile that budget and submit those amendments over to City Council for consideration in May. So here is that expenditure by category chart for the schools, and I asked you earlier to pay attention to those two specific categories that we have in the city budget, but you'll notice that they're missing here when we look at the school expenditures by category, and there's a reason for that. The schools cannot issue their own debt. The city issues debt on the school's behalf, and that debt service is paid for by the city using the school lockbox. But you will not see a debt service category when you're looking at the school operating budget because, again, they can't issue their own debt. The city issues debt on their behalf. The other thing you won't see is that contribution to those policy reserves. In their operating fund, the schools cannot carry a fund balance, so they have no need for a policy reserve and no need for a lockbox. They would not be able to contribute to such a funding vehicle if they had one because they cannot carry a fund balance in their operating fund. So those items are budgeted on the city side, so that's why this pie chart of expenditures by category on the school side looks different than it does on the city side. And what that equates to is if you remove that 20%, their payroll and benefit cost as a percentage of their budget is 77%, where on the city side it was 45%. So general expenses for the schools, roughly about 1/5 of their budget, very similar to the city. So now we're going to move to the operating budget and look at revenue. We'll start with real estate assessments, and this certainly drives our largest single source of revenue, real estate tax revenue. As you can see from this chart, this is looking at the change in assessments over the last 10 fiscal years. And what you'll notice is in 8 of those 10 years, the growth in assessments has been relatively consistent between 4 and 5%. The 2 years that were anomalies on this chart are fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24. Again, this was the period of time we were coming out of the pandemic. There were a number of financial circumstances, economic circumstances that were occurring coming out of the pandemic that certainly impacted real estate assessments. So assessments in fiscal year 23 actually grew by over 14%. At that time, City Council reduced the real estate tax rate from $1.05 down to $1.01. They did that initial first year through an active rebate of 4%. And then in fiscal year 24, City Council made that 4-cent reduction permanent, maintaining that $1.01 rate per $100 of value. And as Chris mentioned earlier, the city manager's proposed budget maintains the $1.01 rate per $100 of assessed value. So what does that translate to in terms of real estate tax revenue? So the next several charts are going to look similar, so let me orient you pretty quickly. The budgeted amount is the blue bar. The red line, or maroon red line, depends on how it looks on your screen, is actually actual revenue collections for the last 3 completed fiscal years. So it's kind of a comparison of budget to actual. And for real estate tax revenue, since we have a very high collection rate. You can see we're usually pretty spot on in terms of our projections of that particular revenue when looking at budget to actual. For FY 2027, we are projecting a 3.3% increase in real estate tax revenue from FY 26. And for all funds, we are projecting $421.7 million in real estate tax revenue. However, I said all funds, not all of the real estate tax revenue goes to the general fund. It actually goes to a couple of different funds. The vast majority is maintained by the general fund, but over the years, City Council has dedicated portions of the real estate tax to various priorities or purposes. So this chart basically lays out those dedications. And as you can see, there are real estate tax revenue that's dedicated to the South Norfolk TIF District, to the Greenbrier TIF, and then there is also a small amount that is dedicated to the Open Space and Agricultural Preservation Fund. And then City Council has also dedicated 2.5 cents, 2 cents to the lot boxes, one on the city side and one on the school side, or excuse me, 0.5 cents on the city side, 1 cent on the school side, and then also dedicated a penny to the city operating budget, and that was part of the implementation of the pay plans several years ago. In terms of current personal property tax revenue, we are projecting a second consecutive year of a decline in current personal property tax revenue. This is our second largest individual source of local revenue. For FY27, we are projecting a 1.1% decrease and a total current personal property tax revenue of $75 million. Next couple of slides, we'll look at some of our consumer-driven revenues, and these have actually performed very consistently and very well, even through the pandemic. The first is general sales tax. As you can see from this slide, for FY 2027, we're projecting a 5.9% increase in general sales tax, which would be a total increase from FY26 of about $3.6 million. And then on the restaurant meals tax, again, this is one that's performed consistently and performed well. We are projecting a 5.5% increase in fiscal year 27 when compared to the current fiscal year. So looking just at the general fund and looking at revenue to the general fund, the important takeaway here is if you look at just the first three categories that are listed there, the general property tax, which is, again, real estate taxes and personal property taxes, other local taxes, which are some of those consumer-driven taxes, and then the 12.8% of state revenue that the general fund receives. Just those three sources make up over 88% of the revenue to the general fund. So the remaining sources that you see listed there make up just under 12% of the revenue to the general fund. And then looking at the school operating fund and looking at revenues by source, as you can see, the vast majority of funding to the school operating fund comes from the state and the city from the lockbox contribution through the revenue sharing agreement. For fiscal year 2027, the revenue sharing formula is just over $310 million. State revenue is estimated at just over $330 million. But what I would remind you is that if we added to the $310 million from the revenue sharing agreement, if we added the $35 million that we contribute to the school lockbox, then we would actually exceed the amount of state revenue by about $5 million in city contribution to the schools. Looking at the other 7 school funds that make up their operating fund, And looking at revenue, you can see the majority of revenue, the highest proportion of revenue is from local sources, and the second highest proportion is from the federal government. The federal revenue is really concentrated in two specific funds, that being the school's grant fund that I mentioned earlier, as well as the school nutrition fund through federal meal reimbursement to the schools. Moving to the capital improvement program. So this pie chart is looking at the 5-year capital improvement program by section. We break the CIP down into 9 functional sections, and this just looks at the proposed program over the next 5 years in terms of each one of those sections. Of note here is the largest section at just over 24% is the education section. That's really being driven almost exclusively by 2 very large projects that I'll mention in just a moment. And then the second largest section is public utilities at just over 21%. City Council was briefed back in May of 2025 about some critical infrastructure and maintenance needs for the water and sewer system, and this is implementing that program that was discussed with council at that time. So looking at the sources of funding in the CIP program and really highlighting 2 areas. First is the high priority one-time account. Sometimes you'll hear us refer to this as the HPOTA. And this is a conversation that we typically have with City Council every year, do a more in-depth look at the high priority one-time account. It's our most significant source of cash funding in the CIP, and we have a few slides on that. But then dropping down and looking at bonds. So we have general obligation bonds, which are for city projects, and then VPSA bonds, which are for school projects. So starting first with the high priority one-time account, and so how does the high priority one-time account receive funding? This is similar to school reversion. At the end of the fiscal year, the city does not expend all of our appropriated funds. If we expended all of our appropriated funds, that would not be good necessarily. So as we under-execute the budget, those funds roll into the high priority one-time account. We also over-realize revenue. We try to be on the conservative side when it comes to revenue projections. Again, we don't want to under-realize revenue because that also creates a problem. So when revenue comes in over our estimates, that also helps to feed the high priority one-time account. So what this slide is showing you is the beginning balance of that account for each fiscal year. And as you can see, at the conclusion of fiscal year 25 or the beginning of fiscal year 26, that balance stood at just over $191 million. But if we program in the city manager's proposed CIP of the next 5 years and look at the ending balance of the high priority one-time account, when we reach the end of the 5-year program, you'll see that balance has been drawn down to $19.9 million. Now, fully transparent here, this slide does not assume any additional funding being added to the high priority one-time account, and that is probably a very unrealistic assumption. As you could see from the earlier graphic, in most years we typically are adding to the high priority one-time account, so this is really taking the most conservative view. So why is cash funding so critical to the CIP? Well, we can either use cash in the CIP or we can use debt. And I'm going to talk about debt more in depth here in just a moment. But in order to use debt or to use bonds, the lifespan of the asset that you're acquiring has to at least be the same number of years as the time frame of the debt you're issuing. So said more simply, If you're issuing 20-year debt, which is typically what we issue here in the city, whatever it is you're issuing it for has to last at least 20 years. Just makes good business sense. So think about projects like IT projects. They do not have a lifespan of 20 years. Think about fire apparatus and replacing those. We certainly don't want them to have a lifespan of 20 years. So it's important that we have a very strong cash balance to fund some of those projects that we have to fund with cash that we cannot fund with bonds. But then toggling over and looking at our use of tax-supported debt over the next 5 years, this graphic is showing you in the maroon section what was previously programmed each year in terms of our use of bonds in the CIP, and this is both for city and schools, tax-supported only. This does not include enterprise or revenue bonds. You can see that we are adding quite a bit in terms of bond funding over the next 5 years. But we're doing it for a very specific purpose, and that is to achieve some of City Council's highest priority projects. So I've kind of broken this down into two categories. The first category are completely new projects. So I mentioned earlier there's 2 school projects that are really driving that proportionality of the education section in the CIP, and one of those is a new project, and that's for the replacement of Carver Intermediate School, and then to fully fund the replacement of the Chesapeake Career Center, we're adding an additional $81.5 million in the proposed CIP. And then on the city side, we have a new project for the replacement of Fire Station 14 and the 5th Police Precinct. We also have a new replacement of the police evidence storage facility and an expansion of that facility, and some expansion of Deep Creek Park, as Chris mentioned earlier. And then to fully fund some projects, we are adding $9 million for the Freeman Avenue Railroad Overpass Bridge project, as well as another $24 million in bond funding to the replacement of Fire Station 4. So again, you remember some of these projects from one of the earlier slides where Chris was talking about things that council has identified as strategic priorities. Well, this is the funding plan, and we have a model that we use for both the city and school lot box. We've run the projects and the bonds through both of those models, and we feel very comfortable using very conservative assumptions in terms of revenue growth in both lock boxes, that we can certainly have the capacity within those lock boxes to fund these projects. So that concludes the numbers portion of the presentation. No one is more thankful for that than I am. So resources to learn more about the proposed budget. Like Chris mentioned earlier, we've really tried to focus on transparency and have rolled out a couple of things. The first is Open Book. We rolled this out a couple of years ago, and you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, that is actually a CIP mapping tool. You can go in and actually click on the various projects that are included in our capital program and see where they are located in the city, get a description of the project, the proposed budget for the project. So that's an opportunity for citizens, if they want more information about a particular area of the city or a particular category of project, they can go in and check out that tool. The middle picture there is just kind of the landing page for Open Book. In addition to the CIP tool, it also allows you to look at the operating budget. If you want to look at a particular department or a particular program, you can do that there as well. And then each year after the budget is adopted, we publish a local tax and fee comparison where we compare our adopted budget to the other cities in the region and look at the taxes and fees that we levy here in the city, as well as those of the other cities. In terms of additional community resources, a video of this presentation will be posted tomorrow, so you can go back and watch that again if you so choose. We have also posted, or at least they've told me that we have posted the proposed operating budget and CIP, and the web address is there. So if you want to go take a look at those documents, you certainly can. And then the address for Open Book is shown there. Something that we're doing that's new this year that we're really excited about releasing, and this is something that we're going to release once City Council adopts the budget, is what we're calling the Budget in Brief. And really, again, this is a transparency initiative. This is something that we hope will engage citizens in the budget. The operating budget and CIP, we're under no illusion. These are very large documents, 350 to 400 pages. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to boil that information down into a much, much smaller document. Think of it like the PAFR. That is produced by the city manager's office and the finance department after the ACFR is completed. It's a much smaller document. We hope to make it that it's much more digestible so that a member of the public could pick up that document and learn about what's included in City Council's adopted budget. So again, this is something that we're going to release once the budget is adopted for citizens to utilize if they want to learn more about what's included in the adopted budget. So as Chris mentioned earlier, I just want to say thank you to my staff. They've done a lot of hard work. We've got some new faces this year. Very proud of them. One of the things that I'm most proud of is they come to work every day, very enthusiastic, and ready to work very diligently on behalf of the citizens. So I just thank them for their hard work, and also want to thank the departments, the city departments, who are certainly an integral part of this entire process. So just thank the departments and thank you to my staff. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Issues on the horizon. I'll go through these pretty quickly. Council is aware of several of the pending pieces of legislation, some of which would have significant budget impacts. The one that's been probably most talked about is collective bargaining for public employees. Based on the experience in other similarly sized jurisdictions, we expect this would cost tens of millions of dollars for the city of Chesapeake. Nearly every locality in Virginia has opposed this and has asked that that the law remain permissive, meaning that there's a local choice, but that is not what the legislation is that's gone to the governor's desk. So we're following that closely because that would have significant budget impacts, as would prevailing wage rate for public works contracts. So this is what is in place with federal projects right now. The requirements of prevailing wage sometimes make the project so much more expensive that we actually turn away federal money, because putting the little bit of federal money into a project federalizes the project, subject it to prevailing wage, and it would cost more than the value of the money that we're receiving from the federal government. So the legislation originally would have applied to local projects. That's been backtracked a little bit. It's unclear right now if it applies to state projects, whether that will similarly apply if the city receives money from the state for city projects. But again, that would have tens of millions of dollars of impact. Collectively, the first two over the period of a few years would have in excess of $100 million of impact pretty quickly. Third, paid family medical leave insurance program. This is expanding benefits or requiring benefits that aren't currently required in the Code of Virginia. We estimate annual cost of this in excess of $8 million a year. Cannabis control, I'll talk about in a minute. Although not directly affecting the budget this year, in future years there's been significant reductions in local land use authority that have been proposed. Many of them failed. However, some that are still tracking, including making accessory dwelling units by right in certain zoning districts, and making multifamily housing development by right on properties owned by religious organizations or other nonprofit tax exempt. Why I bring that up in a budget presentation is because those would be unproffered developments, no ability to mitigate impacts, and would significantly burden over overtaxed infrastructure with no ability to recoup costs from developers. An interesting bill that tracked through the legislature this year would prohibit signs or advertising within the limits of highways. It would require any city that's subject to this legislation wouldn't be allowed to use volunteers. So we use a volunteer sign sweeper program at Chesapeake. It's very successful. It has significant cost savings. Originally, this legislation, as proposed, would have applied to every jurisdiction in Virginia. Most jurisdictions oppose this legislation, and so it's now only applies to the city of Chesapeake. And so we estimate the cost of this at if we hire contractors in approaching $200,000 a year for the city of Chesapeake. We'll talk about this one a little bit because the law as written is problematic, and so I'm not sure that it will be applicable as intended, and so we'll have to decide what, if anything, that we will do with that. Absentee voting in person, available the second and third Sunday before all elections. We pay staff costs for the voter registrar, so this will increase personnel and overtime costs. Additional issues on the horizon. I mentioned this a couple times in last year and at the retreat. We are proposing an increase to data center equipment tax from 48 cents to $2 per $100 evaluation. This will put us more in line with cities and counties that we compete with. It won't have a material impact on the coming budget because we have no data center proposals that are tracking to the point where they would be in place in the coming year. But I just wanted to mention this will be tracking as a proposed tax increase in the budget. When the legislation is finalized regarding cannabis sales, we will bring you zoning amendments and tax changes for council to make a choice of what, if anything, to do to implement that legislation. And then lastly, we have added capacity in the budget to begin preparing for collective bargaining, prevailing wage, and paid family medical leave, but we do not have the capacity with existing resources to address any one of these, let alone all three. Fortunately, the effective dates of these are a couple years into the future, specifically with regard to collective bargaining. But we have nowhere near the capacity to address these. So I just want to make sure that we put that on council's radar screen. So as always, we've reserved all of our upcoming budget sessions for council questions, comments. We'll work through things council would like to achieve in the budget. I know this is a lot of information that we present tonight, but we want you to have time to digest it. In advance of these work sessions, if you have questions, comments, things you'd like us to look at, please send it to us so we can help you as we've done in previous years. We'll use your questions, comments, ideas to frame out these budget work sessions, driving towards May until we ultimately finalize the budget. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, and thank you, Mr. Hobbs, and your staff for what you've done, all the work, and we'll have plenty of time to be discussing this budget as the weeks come. So council will begin our regular meeting at 6:30.